Hello, calculus scholars. Um, I'm here talking to you virtually because tomorrow Alice is going to have to stay home from school. She got a little bit of a cold, so I'm going to stay home with her. But I'm not going to leave you guys hanging because I want to make sure that you are good to go with some of the graphing questions with derivatives. So as a warm-up, what I am going to have you do today is talk about a situation where I'm going to give you a non-calculus question first. And this non-calculus question is simply going to be, what is the slope of the graph of f of x at x equals 4? So here's x equals 4. And I'm going to actually just find the slope of this graph, and it is nice and linear. So we're going down 1 over 1. So our slope is going to be -1 over 1. So I could actually give a algebra student this sort of question. And then the calculus version of this question is, what is f prime of 4? So f prime of 4 is the same thing as saying the plain English interpretation means what is the slope at x equals 4. So if you actually take the derivative notation and you translate it into plain English, you can turn a calculus question into a algebra 1 question. And this will give you the same answer. And also, we're just going to give you a little review of interpreting the derivative and how it relates to slope. So obviously, a positive slope would be increasing, a negative slope would be decreasing, and a zero slope would be constant. So let's take a look at a sample scenario with two graphs. These are actually very similar to the table questions on your critical thinking section, except we're going to get our data from the graphs instead of the tables. So what's going on here, like on number 1, is that we need to have the product rule. So h prime of x is simply equal to f prime of x times g of x plus f of x g prime of x. And let's say that I want to find h prime of 5. So I'm just going to kind of show one of these just to save a little time. What I would do is I would write this as f prime of 5 times g of 5 plus f of 5 times g prime of 5. So it might be helpful to kind of like translate this into plain English when you are evaluating this, but what you're going to be doing, if I want to do f prime of 5, what this is saying is, what is the slope of the graph at on the graph of f at the x value of -5? And we can kind of see here that our slope is -1. And our g of 5, this is just like, what you would do in like an algebra 1 or algebra 2 class, but g of -5 would just be -1. And then we're going to do f of 5. So f of 5 would be 4. And then g of 5 we can kind of see here that the slope here is -1. So this is the equivalent of 1 minus 4, which gets us a grand total of not +3, but -3. And that's it. So all the data that you need for these questions are actually supplied to you by the graph. I'm just going to kind of not show you every question, but just some other question types that you might see. So like on number 2, we might have a quotient rule instead. So this is quotient rule. So I would write this as f of x. So notice that our low and our high are switched. So this is our low, and then our d high would just be g prime of x. Minus high. So high is actually going to be g of x. D low, so that's just going to be f prime of x over low squared. So that's just going to be f of x squared. And once when you have that general formula, you can actually just plug in, like let's say I want to find p prime of 7. I'm just going to do f of 7 g prime of 7 minus g of 7 f prime of 7 all over f of 7 squared. And I'm just going to go to my graphs now and look at the data. So I just actually just translated what I have here. So f of 7 is just going to be 3. And then g prime of 7 is going to, let's see, we're going up 2 over 1. Minus g of 7. So that's 0. We'll just do f prime of 7 anyways, which is also 0. And then f of 7 is just 3, but we're going to square that. So this is going to get us to 6 over 9, which just translates into 2 over 3. Another thing that we'll see are the chain rule type of questions. So just like the critical thinking question on the test, we write our h prime of x. The way that we like to think about it is we do f of g of x. So we're just going to say that this is going to be f prime. We leave the inside, which is the g of x, alone. And I'm just going to put a little multiplication symbol because I'm multiplying this whole thing by g prime of x. So if I wanted to do f prime of, if I wanted to do h prime of 3, I would do f prime of g of 3 times g prime of 3. So I would actually go to my graph. So I would go, obviously I can't do f prime first. I do what's inside first. So G of 3 is just 2. So I'm going to say F primes of 2 times G prime of 3. So that slope at that point is going to be 1. And then I'm going to go find F prime of 2. Now, something's kind of interesting here. If I'm trying to find F prime of 2, what's kind of going on here is it's not like a horizontal tangent, but when you have these corners, your slope doesn't exist. So this would be F prime of X doesn't exist. And if something doesn't exist, the whole thing does not exist, obviously. So we would write D and E. And if you have a more gentle type of thing, so let's say that I wanted to do F prime of -1, that would be 0 though, when you have that like gentle, maximum or minimum. Let's say that I wanted to do H prime of 2. So I would write F prime of G of 2 times G prime of 2 and that would get me to F prime, and I would go to G of 2, just right there. And I would multiply that by G prime of 2. So G prime of 2 is just 1. And then if I'm going to do F prime of 1, there's kind of a D and E type of scenario again. Now, obviously, if I was able to find the slope, then I would be, in pretty good shape. Where we might get a little harder, these are kind of like more of a challenge level beyond what I would go on a test, like something like 3 or 4. But I would have, for instance, if I wanted to do P prime of X, I could actually write this as G prime of X squared minus X. And then I could just take the derivative of what's inside. So that would be 2x minus 1. And I could, at this point, actually plug in the -1 squared minus 1 times 2 times -1 minus 1. So this would get me to G prime of 0 times -3. And if I were to go to my graph and find G prime of 0, this would be a situation. So like if I did, oh, it says -1 actually. So I'm actually just going to do a minus a -1. So this would actually get me to -2. So I'm going to do G prime of -2. or positive 2, I mean. So I'm going to go to G prime of positive 2. So G prime of positive 2 is 1. Times negative 3, and that would just get me to negative 3. So that's probably about as difficult as I would go. But most of the problems on delta math are just going to be conventional product quotient and chain rules. So make sure you kind of know those rules with the function notation. And feel free to email me if you have any questions. But what will be due next class will be just the 21 IP and the 22 notes. So have a great day.